Business. Committee members, we have an agenda before us. I would entertain a motion to approve.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any additions, changes, corrections? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. We have approval of the minutes next for the June 17th. It's been a while since we met. June 17th, 2019, regular meeting of the Community Development Committee. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion, additions, changes, corrections? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Council members, we have kind of a long agenda, nothing too complicated. I know there are a couple of council members that have time constraints today, so we're going to try to move through the agenda as quickly as possible. The first item on our agenda is an information item. It's the 2020 Community Development Division Preliminary Operating Budget, and this will be our first time seeing the budget as in committee, correct? Yeah, so joining us for that is our interim, I guess. Is that your title? Budget Director, or are you our regular?
Mr. Chair and council members, I am permanent.
All right, permanent. Ms. Agason-Huebner. Thank you for joining
You're
us.
very welcome. So again, my name is Heather Augustin-Huebner. I've been before you a couple times to do bits and pieces of the community development operating budget, and this will be the first time where we're wrapping everything together.
Great.
So we are still pretty early in the process, so we're just going to lay out what we have done so far, what our core assumptions are, where some investments are, and to get continued feedback from you as we move forward with the operating budget presentation. The operating budget development. So you've seen this slide before, probably many times before, but just as a reminder, the Community Development Division provides coordinated planning and policy to guide the growth and development of the region. We plan and help fund the regional park system. We provide technical assistance to local government to implement regional policy in their plans. We facilitate community collaboration. We deliver rent assistance and provide affordable housing to low-income individuals. We provide livable communities grants to help clean up polluted sites, expand housing choice, and build developments that help connect housing, jobs, and services. We also identify, analyze, and report on issues of regional importance. So our budget objectives are pretty straightforward. Our budget is designed to support Thrive MSP 2040, and to implement the housing and regional parks policy plans and continue to work on core programs that support the citizens and communities in the Twin Cities metro area. An emphasis on any budget is financial stewardship, and our intention is to construct a balanced budget, identify structural issues where they exist, and mitigate those over time, and maintain reserve balances at council policy levels, and those reserve levels are set through the management committee. This presentation, again, as I mentioned before, will walk you through the Regional Administrator's preliminary 2020 operating budget expenses, uses, and sources. Our budget maintains current service levels and fully issues all housing vouchers to low-income families in the region. We do have a small handful of targeted investments, and I'll call those out specifically as we walk through the budget. So collaboration and outreach is embedded in all of the work that Community Development Division does. And I'd like to briefly share a couple 2019 highlights before we move on to the 2020 budget. The Metro HRA was awarded 89 new federal housing vouchers to provide permanent rent assistance to homeless transit riders. The program works in partnership with the Metro Transit Homeless Action Team and other service providers, targeting the top 100 shelter users. Metro HRA has a dedicated senior outreach coordinator to help serve as a point of contact and to track progress and link voucher holders to permanent housing. And we're also in the process of hiring an associate outreach coordinator to provide additional supports to this population. As you have heard recently, the 3 largest housing authorities in the state opened up their waiting lists. This is the first time this has been done, and our collaboration is a national example of regional collaboration. The collaboration provided significant reach across the region. All 3 agencies leverage relationships with over 300 direct service providers. We had over 45,000 applicants, and over 17,000 of those were to the Metro HRA waitlist. And you'll also notice one of the more fun pictures we have today is our budget. As you all know, parks promote vibrant communities and healthy people. and we're really fortunate to have a nationally renowned park system in our backyard. In 2018, we hit 60 million visits to our regional parks, an all-time high for the system. This achievement is a testament to the hard work and innovation of council staff and our regional parks implementing partners. Even with the record-setting number of visits, we recognize we're not reaching everybody, and some populations are underrepresented. We know that there are barriers to the park accessing our parks and trails. One recent project tackling this issue with creativity at the forefront is the Nature Connector buses. Stemming from a partnership between Metro Transit and park staff, 2 of our buses were wrapped in June in a beautiful mural showcasing butterflies and boldly announcing "This way to nature." These buses can be found on routes that lead to some of our most popular regional parks, helping build awareness and connect residents to the green spaces and natural beauty that can be found nearby. Okay, so moving on to 2020. This slide is just really meant to give you an overview of how we develop our budget. The vast majority of our budget is really set based upon federal and state regulations, negotiated contracts that the past council has acted on. That would include things like labor contracts and regional administration support costs. So the first thing that we do is we implement what we're required to do by the state and federal government and what the council has directed us to do. So in this case, you are inheriting a lot of policy decisions made by the past council, and at some point in the future, a previous council will inherit policy decisions made by yourselves. At the highest level, our operating and pass-through budget is just under $116 million this year. As a general rule, our budget did not have a lot of movement up or down. A couple of the things that I do want to call out is one is the HRA budget is increasing by 2.4%. You'll know that we do have a structural deficit in the HRA, and we'll talk about that a bit more. And our program budget, and by program budget, I'm talking about all of the different units that make up community development minus the HRA. That budget is going down 7.1%. That is primarily because there were some one-time council initiatives that you will see in our 2019 budget that are not represented in our 2020 budget. Other than that, it's very status quo. Okay, so let's talk about at a unit level where we spend our operating and pass-through dollars. The budget, again, is just shy of $116 million, and this represents an operating and pass-through budget that, again, maintains current service levels and fully issues all housing vouchers to low-income families in the region. The budget funds the programs we walked through earlier in this presentation, and nearly 3/4 of our budget is used to fund the HRA programs, which Terry and I have discussed with you previously. Our remaining budget is used to fund our parks and livable communities pass-through programs and our local planning assistance, policy research, and division management work unit. At a little bit more detailed level, housing programs, the costs that you're going to see represented here, pay for rental payments, staffing to operate the unit, and maintenance on our council-owned housing. When you look at the livable communities budget, over 90% of that represents pass-through funds that we send to different agencies. The remainder funds our program operations, and most of that is staff, and then ancillaries, printing, small office equipment, making sure people have computers and keyboards and those sorts of things. The Parks budget includes about $8.5 million of Parks implementing agency O&M pass-through programs. The remaining budget pays for Parks debt service, staffing and consulting for research project like a Parks visitor study, which I'll talk more about on a future slide. The remaining program units total about $6.2 million, and you can see that as the little blowout circle on your far right. And almost all of this represents staffing costs. There's a little bit of consulting in there, but the vast majority of that is staffing costs. Our RA allocation this year is about $3.4 million, and this funds council support we need to do our jobs. It doesn't make sense for the council to have 4 different HR departments. There's one HR department, and we pay for our share of that, similar to IS and the communications department. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about where our money comes from. Our largest program area is HRA, and the federal government pays for most, not as much as we would want, but most of our HRA program. So the federal revenue is for the HRA. We do not yet know what our federal allocation is. So at this point in a year, the federal calendar doesn't play as nicely with ours as we would want. So we don't know what that number is going to be yet. So what we've done is we've made a forecast based upon our historic experience with the federal government. We'll know more later this fall So just know that the HRA is a budget that we will very likely be back to you later this year and is subject to change based upon what we learn from them. The next section, the next largest slice is property tax. That goes, the bulk of that, about 18 million, goes to livable communities grants. The next section is council operations at about $12 million. And part of that is a general purpose levy subsidy of the HRA budget. And then about $1 million of that is parks debt service. State funding goes primarily to the Parks O&M project or program, and the remaining amount, about $2 million, goes to some very specific housing programs that are managed by the HRA. Council-owned housing rental payments represented by FOP, and I'm sorry I couldn't get the entire acronym to fit on the chart, but FOP is the council-owned housing. We actually make money right now. So every month there's payments that come in on that housing, and then we invest that back into the housing. And when and if there's additional funding left over, that goes to help pay down the structural balance that we currently have in the program. Other revenue is interest on other funds, and most of that goes right back out in Livable Communities Fund. So we have an account where the interest accumulates, we put that back into the fund. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about how the money is going to be used. Nearly 83% of our budget is passed through in the form of housing payments, grants to park implementing agencies, and livable communities grants. So that shrinks kind of where we have the ability to really directly influence where the dollars go. But the council does have varying levels of control over these programs. For example, the parks maintenance O&M funding, that's in state statute. We have very minimal control over that. The federal government sets numerous housing standards which we have to follow, and the council does have the ability to set rent standards within certain parameters and utility allowances. And then if you take a look at the Livable Communities grants, we have a good deal of control of that through the council's annual adoption of the Livable Communities Fund Distribution Plan. So within this pass-through amount, there's various levels of control, and depending upon the calendar cycle, you may or may not have had a direct influence in where we have landed right now. Oops, excuse me. So about 12.5% of our budget pays for staff, regional allocation, and for services needed to do our work, debt service, and pay off our regional debt. So again, this is another large portion of our budget where all the decisions leading up to our budget have essentially been made in the terms of labor negotiations and approved contracts. I do want to add, we do have the Community Development Division has 90 FTEs, and we are asking for 1 FTE this year in the Parks Unit. This will be to support additional engagement and grant solicitation work, including the new equity grant program. So the remainder of our budget, that little cutout piece, minus debt service, is where we get to have the investment conversation, at least for this cycle. A lot of the rest of the investment decisions are going to be made throughout the cycle, and you will see those in the next year's budget. So we're looking really closely at this area for how to best invest these dollars around the region. We're partnering with procurement and OEO to really target these areas for the MCUB program. And we continue to just look for how we can best invest these dollars to both support council staff and our regional partners. So we've walked you through the HRA budget a number of times over the past few months, and we have some knowns and we have some unknowns. We know.
Thanks, Ms. Augustin-Hubner. Question from Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Chair. Could you back up one more slide? And I just wasn't writing my notes fast enough. Could you outline the other under other? The $3.1 million under other. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember, give me just 1 second. Let me back up. So I'm not going to look for it specifically in my notes, but here's what the other is. So this is going to be things that we need to operate our system. It is going to be computers. It is going to be desk equipment. It is going to be staff training. It is going to be printing. It is, I would be happy to follow up with a more detailed list of that, what it is, but just general
I just missed what it was, so it's the operational overhead. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Augustin-Hubner.
Okay, so again, we've got some knowns and we have some unknowns in the HRA. So we know that our HRA program serves about 19,000 people a month, including 9,500 children. We know the average family size is 2.9. We know the average income is about $16,000. We know 46% of our families have wage income and 47% of the households are elderly or disabled. We know the average tenant share is about $400 and the average HRA rent share is $740. We don't know some really critical components.
And a question from Councilmember Johnson.
Just briefly, I like facts and figures like that, and they're probably in something that we've gotten before. But, and I'm writing down furiously, but if we could just some of those really good snapshots of who we serve and the parameters around that for us, I think that helps us, at least for me as a new council member, kind of get my head around what it means, and I can better convey that to others. So, it helps if we could get that afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Agassiz-Newberry.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Council Member, we will follow up with that. Okay, so that's what we know, and we'll follow up with what we know. There's some really critical pieces to our budget that we don't know yet, right? So every year, the federal government puts out something called fair market rent, or fair market rate analysis, and then Terry and her great staff at the HRA take a look at that and take a look at what is, from the federal data that we get, what does that mean for our region? And then they will come back with the recommended, when we're going to have the conversation about what's going to be our rent standards. We have a boundary that we can set our rent standards in, but we do have discretion, and that conversation will come to you as a council, likely in October. Best guess right now, it'll be October. At that same time, we'll come back to you, and Terry and her staff will come back and talk about utility allowances. This could have a really dramatic impact on the budget. Right now, we're assuming 2% rental rate increases. So just be prepared that could be significant. I don't mean to overstate this, but very small changes do have the ability to really quickly influence the number of vouchers that we can issue.
Question from Councilmember Johnson.
Again, just briefly, and I know everybody across the country has to set based on what the federal government's telling us, but how far are they lagging in their data? Do we know?
Mr. Chair, council members, I may ask Terry Smith to come up to the table with me to help answer that question.
Ms. Smith, thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, council members. So it's a very complicated formula, Mr. Chair, Council Member Johnson. It's a very complicated federal formula based on, they do an analysis of fair market rents, so what it costs to rent a modest rental unit across the country, and they issue what's called fair market rents every October, and that amount is supposed to be what it costs to rent a modest rental unit in today's market. And the amounts are different. They issue them for metropolitan and non-metropolitan regions all over the country. And then we're charged with setting our rent limits between 90 and 110% of those issued fair market rents.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms.
Okay.
Agassiz-Newberry.
So later this year, when we have more data, we'll come back and say, hey, listen, these are the options, and there are options. Right now, we invest in making sure that our voucher holders have some ability to move within the region. That comes at a price. That is an investment that we make. It's a choice. So just know that we'll let you know as soon as we have information, but it's likely not going to be until later this fall. Okay, so let's talk about some exciting options that we have. So this slide focuses on a pretty modest portion of our budget where determinations have not already been negotiated or made. There's 3 recommended 2020 investments I'd like to lay out for you today. The first is the Parks Visitor Study, and it's about $500,000. The Parks Visitor Study provides key inputs that are used in annual parks use estimates and provides an estimate for local and non-local visitation. These are key inputs to funding formulas, and without the visitor study, we would have no way to distribute the funds as required by Minnesota state statutes. It's also an opportunity to collect data and demographics of park visitors and activities they pursue. This provides us the data to identify if there are inequities or differences across different demographic groups. This information helps us prioritize investments and to create a more equitable system. The planned survey improves upon past surveys in a number of ways. First, it better addresses the under coverage of limited limited English proficiency visitors, fast trail users. As you can imagine, catching somebody as they speed by on a bike is a little bit of a challenge. Youth under 18. It also allows for more complete collection of demographic data, including additional disaggregation of race, ethnicity, and gender identity. The visitor study will also provide some key data to independently assess our use of cell phone GPS data, which we use to study visitation to individual parks and trails. So right now, the study provides an accurate system representation, but not at the individual park unit. And to do it at the individual park unit is incredibly expensive, potentially prohibitively expensive. By investing in this approach, we could take a look. We're doing our normal visitor study. We'll look at the GPS data and see if they validate each other and to see if that's a sound methodology moving forward. So if we're able to get this level of data, it will vastly improve our ability to make decisions on equity or other planning investments. For example, understanding which parks and trails have the greatest inequities in usage will help us identify where investments will be most effective. So I'll pause there for just a second before I can move on.
Questions from committee members? I don't see any.
Okay, so let's
Let's
transition on to Planet. So local planning assistance leads the council's implementation of the Metropolitan Land Planning Act. One way it does
I'm sorry to interrupt. We do have a comment from Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Chair, thank you. I think I want to just kind of echo what Judy shared, or sorry, Councilmember, shared earlier. It really is helpful to have, when you're sharing information, data heavy information like that, or like what the specifics of the investment are, it'd be really helpful to have that visually provided to, it's hard to kind of keep up writing those notes to consider later, but just so that's just something I want to, or just maybe slow it down a little bit, especially if it's something that we're going to be asked to consider in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, council members, I will definitely incorporate that, and we'll be back before you again.
Perfect.
So I can do a couple things. One, we can follow up with some more specifics on these individual projects. I'm happy to sit down with anybody individually, and I will also slow down.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I was trying to go fast because I know some of you are trying to get out of here.
Appreciate it.
Ratchet down. I'll ratchet it down just a bit. Okay, so let's get back to the Planet. So local planning assistance leads the council's implementation of the Metropolitan Land Planning Act. One way it does this is by providing technical assistance to communities on topics around land use, parks, transportation, economic competitiveness, resilient, equity, and engagement. This initiative will fund workshops, webinars, and other forums that will support local planners successfully work through the local planning challenges of implementing comprehensive plans. So we have a lot of regional policies. This is all about helping local communities achieve the regional policies. And we know that there are communities of varying sizes and different levels of existing capacity, either due to training or due to staff size or a wide variety of challenges they may face. And this is just one way that we provide that support. And Lisa may not say this or the other staff, but it's an award-winning project or award-winning initiative. It's been very successful in the past.
Councilmember Bento.
Mr. Chair, Heather, and how much for the Planet?
$50,000.
$50,000.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. And to the Planet program, it's around maybe how to create policies for sustainability. Is that kind of workshop-y stuff? Do we have, like, if they literally don't have capacity within their team to do comp planning, do we bring assistance in that form as well?
Ms. Agassiz-Hübner.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to default to our director on this one.
Ms. Barajas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Johnson. Actually, in what we're planning for in the future for 2020 is on implementing comprehensive plans. So taking the next step with zoning ordinances, how to get policies done locally, and really listening to what communities are telling us through the planning process where they're unsure about what their next steps might be, and using that to shape our program. The past iteration of Planet leading up to the development and submittal of comprehensive plans was about policy development and actually developing the different components of comprehensive plans and going above and beyond that. Where communities don't have the capacity, the council also had provided nearly $2 million in planning grants to communities. You'll see that in some of your business items. I don't recall, maybe one of them today has a funding associated with it. But we also have our sector representatives work closely with local planning staff, especially in communities who have maybe just their planning commissioner is writing that for them, or in other places where they might just have a half-time clerk as their only staff person to really help them get over the finish line. In addition to everybody else, even if they have a full planning department, of providing that technical assistance as requested as needed.
Thank you.
Ms. Agnes-Newman.
Okay, so I'm also going to talk about climate stats, and this is a project that was approved by the prior council, and we are anticipating all of the expenditures won't hit in this year and will carry over into the 2020 budget. So I just wanted to make sure all of you were aware of what this project was. So we know that many local governments in our region are eager to act on climate change, and we're trying to reduce greenhouse gases in their communities. While there's some clear strategies to reduce carbon, communities want technical support on finding strategies specifically around transportation and land use. The Metropolitan Council is uniquely positioned to provide this information given our understanding of transportation and land use in our region. Projects funds will pay for research and stakeholder engagement. The work will accelerate the development of our first release of Metro Climate Stats and provide high-quality science that might help to inform other scenario planning work in the Community Development and Metropolitan Transportation Service divisions here at the Council. This study is a unique and innovative approach to technical assistance to communities by a metropolitan agency. The initiative will provide cost-benefit information portfolio strategies to reduce carbon in the transportation and land use sectors. It will also remove technical obstacles for climate action planning for communities. And I will make sure that we will put together 101 sheets and get those out if anybody would like to refer back to these projects.
Thank you. Question from Councilmember Alice Ingebrigtsen.
What was the dollar amount for that one?
Ms. Agnes-Newman.
Mr. Chair, council members, right now we're forecasting that we'll carry over about $120,000 into our 2020 operating budget. It's currently in our 2019 budget, but we're anticipating we'll ask to carry that forward.
So 120 altogether, or just in carryover?
Mr. Chair, council members, I'm going to verify this, but I believe it was a $250,000 project, and we plan to carry about $120,000 over. Lisa's nodding too, so I feel like my numbers are accurate there.
Thank you.
Ms. Agnes-Newman.
Okay, so we're still pretty early in the budget development process. So this was just kind of our first swath of our work, so that one, we can get feedback on where you want information, what level of detail of information that you're looking for, and we're going to be continuing to have conversations over the coming months. So I've highlighted a handful of these here. So one, I'm going to be back before you likely in August to talk about the Parks Capital Program. Also planning to be back in front of you for sure in October and likely before that to talk about HRA. We'll talk about rent standard policy, utility allowances, and how those are going to, and what the impact and your choices, how that will impact the budget. And I've mentioned this before, but we have 150 council-owned rental units. They are getting older, and one of the things that the entire council is really trying to do is to have good asset management. So there is an asset management study going on right now. We've got a first draft back, and we're working through that. So once that study is landed and we're comfortable, we have the level of detail we need, we'll come back and we'll let you know what, if any, impact that may have on our 2020 budget. We do budget for asset management of the housing. So I have a feeling that one, if there's impacts in 2020, well, I don't know a feeling. I know if there's recommended changes to the 2020 budget, we'll come back for that. And it's also going to be a longer term conversation, right? Like we're gonna own these houses for the foreseeable future. So I think a lot of that conversation is going to be, what does the long term look like? How are we going to manage that? How does that fit into our existing resources? We also know that there's a bunch of ongoing conversations. There's the equity grant conversation that's ongoing. Those applications have been released. We know we've had a number of conversations about the regional parks interest earnings. We've gotten feedback from a lot of groups. One of the areas where we've gotten a lot of feedback about the interest earnings is particularly tied to the equity grant program. So we're going to recommend right now is just that we pause on the investment conversation about the interest earnings until we get through this pilot round of the equity grant program, and then have a conversation about what we want to do with those parks interest earnings. One of the nice things about the interest earnings is we have the flexibility to bring that into our budget at any time during a quarterly budget amendment. So we can continue to have conversations on how to invest those, but we're going to want to program the right amount in the year where we're actually going to spend them. So even if we're going to start a grant program or something else, it's probably going to take a handful of months for that to get going, and then we'll make sure that we bring the matching dollar amount into the right operating year budget. I know that gets a little wonky and a little technical, but it's just about we want to make sure we bring the right dollar amount in, but those conversations will be ongoing.
Question from Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Chair. Could you speculate at when you say pause, how long of a pause you're thinking about?
Ms. Hubner.
Mr. Chair, council members, I mean, that's really a decision for you. If you're asking for my recommendation, I would recommend.
I guess clarity when you said we are recommending that we pause until the council hasn't recommended that, so someone is. So what's the thought
I'm sorry.
behind that? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, councilors, staff recommendation is that we temporarily pause. One of the if we're going to put more money into in any grant program, specifically if it's tied to a pilot program, we want to see what lessons learned. How does the application process go? What did we learn through that? What was the impact on our implementing agencies and our partners? And just so that if we're coming back to you, we can come back with a more rounded package.
Councilmember?
Thank you. I know this is not your area, but I think one of the things I would I know that MPOSC, the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission, and commissioners feel very strongly about is, and I would also venture the members of the Equity Advisory Committee that I've talked to, is that we've been waiting a long time to have dollars invested in advancing equity. Unfortunately, the restrictions placed on the equity grant program limited it to capital investment, which was not in alignment with our own learning and expectations. It was just the resources we had available. So there's a lot of interest. I think even we spoke about it extensively at the council, the full council meetings and at this group, but for sure at the Regional Park and Open Space Commission, that we get moving on this work. So I just would like to encourage staff to really take that to heart. And that we don't have revenue currently, although it's a pilot, I understand that, that is flexible enough to be spent in the ways that we know we need to be spending revenue as it relates to creating more equity in the park system. So I just want to, I guess, memorialize that. Is that the language we're using? Memorialize that and ask staff to really make sure we're considering and thinking about that.
Thank you. And I'm correct in that regional parks interest earnings are fully discretionary, right? They don't have the limitation of being available exclusively for capital investment.
Mr. Chair, council members, they're restricted to the betterment of the parks system. Right. So yes, flexibility in terms of operating or capital.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Wolf, then Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since we don't have your PowerPoint, I don't know if there's another chance to ask this question, but you mentioned earlier about the HRA stuff with the operating deficit that we've had. This has been ongoing for several years. We spent a couple years churning through our reserves. Reserves ran out. Now we're using general fund money for this. And the council asked last year that there be a discussion with the portions of the region that we are running the HRA for, because it's not our HRA, we're providing a service, to find out if they had any interest in using any of their funds to cover that deficit. If we wait until October, it's going to be too late again. And so I wanted to find out if that conversation has been happening at all, or if staff or the chair or somebody has decided that we're not going to have that conversation.
Ms. Hubner or Ms. Barras?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Wolf, certainly in our conversations, as the chair has been touring the region, those portions, those would have been the opportunities to have that discussion. Other issues were discussed and funding in general was discussed. And just as a reminder for folks too, that our service territory covers suburban Ramsey County, Anoka County, and suburban Hennepin County, and Carver County. Yes, sorry, I was thinking of a different map. And so we haven't been to all of those counties yet, but certainly we felt that as staff that this is a policymaker to policymaker discussion. As staff, we are all kind of in the same boat. So like, well, we don't get to decide the budget, but we thought this needed to be a policymaker to policymaker. Certainly, I'd encourage you to speak with your fellow colleagues who represent those areas as well, to be sure it's on their radars too. So when they're meeting with those counties, when they do have those conversations, that we can help prepare them, and if that's of interest to them, to do that.
Councilmember?
So far, there has not been any of that discussed.
Mr. Chair, not directly.
Barras. So then this has come
To
up
my
before,
knowledge.
Councilmember Wolf, as well.
It has
and so-
been a
right.
repeated conversation, and last year when we approved the budget, both Councilmember Barber and I said, this has to happen before the next budget is done, because we can't keep using our general fund to subsidize something that is for only a portion of the region. That's not fair, because those other communities like Plymouth, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Dakota County, and Scott County are already figuring out how they're going to do their shortfall, and they shouldn't pay again through property taxes to cover the shortfall for the other part of the metro area, because it's not fair. And it's very concerning to me that that conversation hasn't happened at all. I was kind of waiting for the chair to have that conversation because
Right.
she's the boss, but I don't know how to make it happen.
So I will commit to following up with the chair. I think that's right. That's where the conversation should at least start. So Ms. Barras and I will approach the chair and have this conversation and have something to report back from the chair by the next Community Development Committee meeting.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair?
Yep.
I second that, and it's come up before Management Committee as
Right,
well, too.
yep.
And I know Councilmember Barber, maybe you mentioned that, but, we'd like to see something happen, so.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Lee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. When we talk about the HRA asset management, does that include reviewing if, you said they were this old stock, does that include reviewing to make sure that they're ADA compliant and accessible? And if not, do we have to, do some reverse engineering? Because we're starting to do that with our bus stops. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Huebner.
Mr. Chair, council members, I may ask Terry to come back up and field that question.
Ms. Smith, welcome back.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lee. I heard part of the question. I didn't hear it all. So I wonder if you could repeat your
I was just wondering if, as part of the asset management of the HRA housing properties, that we look into how accessible all of our buildings are.
So, Mr.
Ms.
Chair and
Smith.
Councilmember Lee, so all the units that the council owns, there's 150 units and they're all scattered sites. So we don't have any, like apartment buildings. They're all single units. We do not have any specifically handicapped accessible units. And I think the reason for that is when we purchase units, we purchase the homes on the open rental market. And for example, 85 of them are single family homes and they were built how they were built. And so to redo, and we've added accessibility features as needed, like ramps for wheelchairs in some units as the need has come, but none of them are fully handicapped accessible. But there are other changes we've made. If we have a person that has hard of hearing, for example, we've put in accommodations in a specific unit for that purpose. But changing complete structures is not something that we anticipate we were doing this assessment.
Oh, thank you.
Further questions from Councilmember Johnson?
And not for now, but I'm interested in things like the policy decision around purchasing property and managing them versus partnering. Um, and I also need to just understand, and I'm sorry, newness, who serves as is it us that serves as the governing board of the HRA as a whole? I'm just trying to get a handle around in the future how we make some of those policy decisions. So,
Ms. Smith.
Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Johnson, yes, the Community Development Committee is a governing board and the council as a whole, the full governing body for the HRA. And so the opportunities that you have to make policy decisions we'll be back in the beginning of August to have some policy discussions on administrative policies. The Public Housing Agency plan has been part of that, and we'll be talking with you, I think it's August 5th, the meeting date, on having a conversation with you about some policy decisions. You'll have the opportunity, as Heather indicated, with the rent standards and the utility allowances in October, but we've been sort of diving into those piece by piece. And I'm happy to have an offline conversation or present an information item on how the council became the owners of these family affordable housing units at a future meeting, if that would be of interest to you all.
Committee members, interest? Well,
Yes.
it looks like it would be. Thanks. Further discussion on the report, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Just an addition to that, I think I'd also I was thinking the same thing about the ownership versus partnership. And so in that informational conversation, it would be nice to know the history about where we landed, but what else might have been considered as it relates to partnering with. We have a lot of great nonprofit organizations that exist to support affordable housing, and maybe that isn't an option or is an option or whatever, but any limitations around partnerships would be great to know.
Great. Further discussion? Ms. Agassiz-Newman, was this the end of your report?
Yeah, it was.
All right.
So I guess I just wanted to, one, to answer any additional questions you have, and two, to issue an invitation. The way I presented this to you today was how we have presented it in other years. It doesn't necessarily mean that it meets your needs. So if there is additional information you would like, if there's ways that we could present the budget information to you in a way that is clearer to you, I would welcome that feedback. I mean, you've got a really large budget in front of you, and it's your first year going through this, so just know we're here to help in any way that we can to just digest it. And some of you see me in MTS and community development, so just open offer on both of those. I really appreciate the feedback, because I don't feel like I'm doing my job if you don't feel like you have the information to make informed decisions. You can either route those through the chair or Lisa, or feel free to email me directly.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Further discussion, Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could we get this budget presentation, because we don't have the slides?
right.
Mr. Chair, council members, one of the things that we often do with budget presentations is we want to make sure that you see the budget before the public sees the budget. Is kind of that first point of information. So that is something that we have historically done with most of the council budget presentations. So we anticipate that it will get posted either tomorrow morning or later this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
It's just a really great tool when we're listening to be able to follow along and then catch up if we're getting caught up on one piece. So it'd be wonderful to know if there's an opportunity to have it shared in a different manner, so that while we're receiving the presentation, just helps with learning and intake.
Agree.
Notes.
I agree. Ms. Agassiz-Newman.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, council members, we'll make sure that I will email it. Would emailing in advance work?
Please. Yep, please.
And I will also make sure to bring printed copies, so everybody will be covered one way or the other, if that works.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further discussion on this preliminary operating budget presentation. Further discussion. Seeing none, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll see lots more on this as we go. Yep. Committee members, for the first time this term, we have a consent agenda on our Community Development Committee agenda. And so these are non-controversial items. The first two have been reviewed by MPOSC and So I will just go forward with the consent agenda. The first one is 2019-158. It's the annual Metropolitan Regional Parks Operation and Maintenance Report. The second item is item 2019-159, future reimbursement consideration for Carver County. I will note that that's just approving the future reimbursement consideration, not approving the actual reimbursement. The third item is 2019-197, Parks and Trails Legacy Fund Grant Agreement Signature Authorization, which authorizes the CD Director to execute grants in the Parks and Trail Legacy Fund. And I would seek a motion to approve the consent agenda. Thank
So
you.
moved.
Councilmember Vento, is there a second?
Second.
Great. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair, I have just one quick thing.
Councilmember
I just
Wolf.
wanted to remind everybody, in state law, it says that the legislature is supposed to appropriate 40% of the operations and maintenance funds for the regional park agencies. If you look at the chart there, it's running plus or minus 10%, more minus than plus. And one of the things that the legislature did when they came up with the legacy funds was then said that's not supposed to supplant your appropriations, it's supposed to augment it. And they themselves have supplanted their operating funds. So just to keep that in mind in the future when you're looking at the budget, that most of the costs of our regional park system is being borne by user fees and property taxes upon those regional park agencies rather than coming from state funds like it should.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other discussion on the consent agenda? Councilmember Atlas Ingerbritsen.
I just am wondering from fellow members on CC. I know we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm curious how many people feel like they would benefit from learning more about the legacy funds that we administer in the Parks and Trails 25-year plan. Because I think there's a couple of key things, that being one. Thanks for bringing that up, Councilmember Wolf. The other piece being around kind of the 4 key pillars of the plan, and we're continually not investing. I think as the state, the citizens of the state have identified in certain areas, particularly in non-capital expenses. And we have a lot of constituent feedback we receive around that from all kinds of different communities, from exurban, suburban to communities of color. And I think it would just be something that would be really helpful for going forward.
Right. Looks like there's a lot of nodding heads. I see Ms. Barajas has made a note of that. Mr. Mullen is here somewhere as well. So we will have a future presentation on that. Further discussion on the consent agenda. Further discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those items carry, and we'll move on to the non-consent business items. The first one being 2019-173, JT. It's a joint committees report. It's the City of Woodbury 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. And we will ask Ms. Wendell. Is that it, Wendell?
That's correct.
Oh,
Yes.
great. Thank you. Ms. Wendell, thanks for being here.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. The item before you is the City of Woodbury's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. As a reminder, I'm the sector representative for Districts 11 and 12. I'd also like to let you know that Carl Batalden, Community Development Coordinator, is in the audience today. I'd also like to take a minute just to thank them for their hard work in finishing their plan and doing a great job. So
Thank you for your work, and thanks for being here today.
excellent. So we'll get started.
Ms. Wendell.
So the map shown before you is the location for the regional system components within the City of Woodbury. And so there's 4 interceptors that are within the city boundaries. In addition, I-94 and I-494 principal arterials go through the city, as well as the planned Metro Gold Line route. It is located in Washington County, and Washington County is the park implementing agency for the regional park system components. And regional trails located within the city include Central Greenway Regional Trail and Afton Bluffs Regional Trail Search Corridor, as shown in Figure 1 in your staff report. There are no state or federal recreation lands within the city. For their community designation, Thrive MSP 2040 designates the city as Suburban Edge. The city is bordered by other cities, including Oakdale and Lake Elmo, West Lakeland Township, City of Afton, Denmark Township, City of Cottage Grove, Newport, and Maplewood. So several cities surrounding the community. In terms of forecasted growth, also shown in Table 1 in the staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the city will grow by about 15,300 people, representing 5,300 jobs and also 5,300 households and 4,600 jobs, as shown in the table. In terms of residential density, which is shown in Table 2 of the staff report, the overall guided density for the community for their community designation is 3 to 5 dwelling units per acre. And so within the table, you can see that the overall density for guided residential land is expected to be at 3.6 units per acre. Figure 3 in the staff report shows the existing land use. The city's predominant existing land use is single-family residential at almost 30%. Next is undeveloped land at about 27.1%, which allows for future residential development to the eastern and southern areas of the community. And then also there's some freeway frontage in the northeast part of the city that would be available for development. Onto their 2040 future land use map, shown in Figure 4 of the staff report. The plan does stage development to accommodate their forecasted growth between now and 2040. The plan also illustrates the planned staging in the 2040 land use map, which shows the phasing areas for the community, as well as areas for post-2040 growth accommodation in that urban reserve land use category, and then also areas that are not planned to receive sewer service, as shown in the rural estate land use category. And for that, the proposed findings is that the plan does conform to the Metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of the adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. For the meeting schedule for this community, it was seen at the Environment Committee on July 9th and will be seen by the full council on July 24th. And with that, the proposed action is to authorize the City of Woodbury to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect. Advise the city to A, when available, provide the council with the dates of each of the 3 watershed districts approved local water management plan and the date that the city adopted the final local water management plan. The city should also provide the council with a copy of the final LWMP and will be included in the final plan document that the city adopts if it differs from the one that was contained in the plan on April 24th, 2019. B, a separate request for functional classification changes must be submitted to the council by the city or county with jurisdiction over the roadway, and that the council's action on the 2040 plan does not confer approval of these proposed classification changes. And then C, implement the advisory comments in the review record for roadways and surface water management. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wendell. Questions on that report? Councilmember Vento, were you asking? Okay. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to thank the City of Woodbury for using roughly the same colors on their map as the previous one so that it's easier to look at. Because a lot of cities have been choosing drastically different color schemes and it's hard to read. My question is, in the future land use, I see phase 2 and phase 3, it's not very easy to read when you make it bigger because the can't remember what the word is. And resolution isn't very good on the graphic that we have to look at. But
yes,
why is there no phase 1?
Ms. Wendell.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Wolf, could I ask Carl Batalden to come and answer that?
Thank you for joining us.
Chair Lilligren and members of the committee. The reason that there is no phase 1 is that we're currently in the middle of phase 1.
Okay.
So phase 2 is sort of the 2020 decade, and then phase 3 will be the 2030 decade, roughly. In the land use chapter, in the text, there's some pretty clear language as to when the phasing begins and sort of how that'll all come to be. But yes, we're in the middle of phase 1. Actually, we're in the middle of phase 2 as well. So phase 1 is for the most part.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Batalden. Further discussion on this report, Councilmember Vento.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. Carl, is phase 1 and the portion of phase 2, is that development that's down near Cottage Grove on the south end?
Go.
Member Vento, members of the committee, most of the area proximate to the Cottage Grove border is either in phase 2 or 3,
Okay.
or it's in an area that we're not likely seeing development within the prior to 2040. So if you look, I'm looking at that map over there, the sort of the bottom right, there's kind of a goldenrod color. That is our urban reserve area. Those are areas where we don't anticipate the need for development prior to 2040. There may be development needs post 2040, but as we look at our population and household targets, we don't see the need for the growth in that goldenrod color. And then on the bottom left, there's sort of a gray area. This is the area of the city that has some rolling hills and topography. And when you're thinking of development from a sanitary sewer perspective, rolling hills and topography is not your friend. So these tend to be more your larger lot development. And then that pale sort of buff yellow color in the center bottom are the phase 2 and 3 areas, with again phase 2 being open for development, probably go through about 2026, and then phase 3 would go through 2040.
Thank you. Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So phase 1 is
Mostly complete. Phase 1 is in the sort of, if you look at that map, the right-hand side, the upper 2/3, these are mainly built out developments, your Stone Mill Farms, your Dancing Waters. I say it's mainly complete because there are a couple of like lots here and there, but from a development approval, from a planning perspective, phase 1 is basically.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Batalden. Further questions on this report? Further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Wendell has brought a proposed action before us, two-part proposed action related to the authorizing the City of Woodbury's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Is there a motion to approve? Thank you, Councilmember Bento. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Again, thanks, Mr. Batalden, for being on hand to answer the questions. We'll move on to our next non-consent business item. It's 2019-172, City of Marine on St. Croix 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Ms. Wendell, you're up again.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Our next item for before you all within the District 12 is the City of Marine on St. Croix. I'd also like to mention that Bill Miller, one of the council members, is here in the audience here today.
Mr. Miller.
If
Thank you
should
for
have
being here,
questions
Mr.
of
Miller.
him. We'd also, in addition, like to thank you and your community for all of your hard work in finishing your comp plan. Thank you. Excellent. And so we'll take a look at the regional systems for the city. Washington County is the park implementing agency for the regional park system components for the community, for which the plan accurately describes those components, shown in Figure 1 in your staff report. Regional trails located within the city include Glacial Hills Regional Trail Search Corridor, and the plan also appropriately acknowledges state recreational lands within the city, including the William O'Brien State Park. In terms of community designation, Thrive MSP 2040 designates the city as diversified rural. The City of Marine on St. Croix is located in northeastern Washington County and is bounded by two Minnesota communities. So we have the city of Scandia to the north and May Township to the south. Polk County, Wisconsin borders the city to the east, separated by the St. Croix River. And Table 1 of your staff report shows the forecasted growth between 2020 and 2040. Shows that the city will grow by 200 people, about 110 households, and an increase in 20 jobs. The existing land use map shown here and also in Figure 3 in the staff report shows the existing land use pattern. The predominant land use of park, recreational, and preserve is about 38%. Because much of William O'Brien State Park is within the city, so that encompasses that percentage. And the second most is undeveloped land at 33.8%, really due in part to the abundance of natural resources within the city and that limit development such as wetlands. And then thirdly is the single family residential at about 12.8%. Their 2040 future land use map, shown in Figure 4, shows that they do update some of the guiding land uses and their categories within the plan. The majority of the city's 2,676 acres is guided rural residential, and they have that overall maximum density of 4 units per 40 acres. Areas along the St. Croix River include properties that have previously been subdivided into smaller lots, and then those areas are guided rural residential and then also urban residential. And they're kind of, you could see on the eastern part of the community, they're kind of those dotted properties. And with that, the proposed findings that the plan conforms to the Metropolitan System Plan, is consistent with the council policies, and is compatible with the plans and adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. For their meeting schedule, as a reminder, because the community is not connected to regional wastewater system, they do not go before the environmental committee, and so they'll be seen by the full council on July 24th as well. And so the proposed action is to authorize the City of Marine on St. Croix to place its 2040 plan into effect, and to advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for surface water management. And with that, I'm also happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Wendell. Any questions on that report, Councilmember Johnson?
One technical on the last
Yes.
slide on the online presentation. It says July 10th to the.
Thank you.
But I know that that would be impossible. So I assume there might have been a juggle and scheduling along the way or something. I don't know. But
Mr. Chair,
meeting got
Councilmember
canceled.
Johnson, yes, we did have a change in the slide due to the meeting movement. And so, yes, the old slide did state the 10th. Thank you for addressing that, and it will go on the 24th.
Thank you. Further discussion on that report? Councilmember Vento.
I just want to put in a pitch for the community of Marina and St. Croix. It's not in my district. It's in Council Member Gonzalez's. But if you've never been to Marine, go. And if you're trying to figure out when, every season is beautiful in Marine, but autumn is just breathtaking. And the drive, if you don't take the freeways, go on 96 and it'll, or 95, either one, it'll just blow your mind. It is so gorgeous. And they've got some wonderful restaurants and shops there. You'll have a great time. Take time to enjoy the wild and scenic St. Croix. It's fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
That advertisement doesn't come with any. Someone's paying you.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Vento. Further discussion on the report? If not, Ms. Wendell's brought proposed actions before us. Is there a motion?
So moved.
second.
Thank you. A motion and a second. I want to thank Councilmember Miller for being here and thank your community for their work on behalf of their comprehensive plan. Mr. Chair and council members, thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you. And thanks, Ms. Wendell, for your work. Next item is 2019-174 JT. It's the City of Minnetrista's 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. Ms. Thaman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Freya Thaman, and I'm the sector representative for District 1. And I'll be presenting the City of Minnetrista's comprehensive plan update today. Let's see if the slide, it's loaded. Great. The City of Minnetrista is located in western Hennepin County. It's surrounded by the communities of Independence, Orono, Mound, Shorewood, Victoria, and Laketown and Watertown townships. As you can see, the City of St. Bonifacius is located entirely within the boundaries of the City of Minnetrista. Thrive MSP 2040 designates Minnetrista in 3 different community designations: agricultural in the west, diversified rural in the center portion of the city, and then emerging suburban edge in the eastern portion of the city, as well as near St. Bonifacius. The slide shows the regional system components within Minnetrista. Trunk Highway 7 runs east-west in the southern portion of the city. Regional park and trail features within Minnetrista include Lake Minnetonka Regional Park and Carver Park Reserve, as well as Galewoods Farm and Kingswood Special Recreation features. Regional trails located within the city include the Dakota Rail Regional Trail and the Baker Carver Regional Trail. And then the Loose Line State Trail is also within the city. The city is served by regional interceptors with wastewater treated at the council's Blue Lake Wastewater Treatment Plant in Shakopee. The slide shows the forecasted growth in the city. The council forecasts that between 2020 and 2040, the city will grow by 4,000 people, representing an addition of about 2,100 households. And there'll be an increase of 300 jobs in the city in that same 2020 to 2040 timeframe. The plan includes some agreed upon revised forecasts for employment, and the forecasts were increased to reflect some expanded commercial along Highway 7 in the city. Those agreed upon forecasts are shown here as well as detailed in Table 1 of the review record. This slide shows the planned residential density for the emerging suburban edge areas of the city. This table, which is also Table 2 of the staff report, shows that the city is consistent with council policy for emerging suburban edge communities. The city has a planned net residential density of 3.43 to 8.9 units per acre, which is consistent with council policy of 3 to 5 units per acre for new development and redevelopment in emerging suburban edge communities. This slide is of the city's existing land use. Most of the city is agricultural and undeveloped. Those two represent about 60% of the existing uses in the city, and they're shown here in the lighter shades of gray. The plan's vision statement includes the desire of the city to maintain its rural character and preserve the farmland in the community while protecting and improving natural areas. A few of the other existing uses shown here are park and recreation areas, which are in a darker green in the south and in the central part of the city, as well as single-family residential, which is shown in a darker yellow, and then there's a small amount of commercial shown in red here. This is the city's future land use. The city's western area is predominantly permanent agriculture, shown in light green, and this area is guided at 1 unit per 40 acres. Then the largest area of the city is guided in a rural designation, in rural and rural urban reserve. And that area is shown in spring and olive green, and it's guided at 1 unit per 10 acres. Then on the east, the area that's within the red and blue lines is where the regionally sewered growth will happen within the community. You'll see in the south that there's an area in pink, and this area is guided mixed residential, and it's also referred to as the Woodland Cove area. This area was previously approved with the city's 2030 plan and provides significant capacity for the forecasted growth within this planning period. The city's plan is consistent with Thrive and its land use policies for the agricultural, diversified rural, and emerging suburban edge community designations. The proposed findings are that the plan conforms to Metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policy, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent governmental units in affected jurisdictions. This plan was seen at the Environment Committee at its July 9th meeting, and the committee unanimously approved the recommendations associated with the plan in the staff report. And then this plan is scheduled for the agenda of the July 24th Metropolitan Council meeting. So the proposed actions before you today are to authorize the City of Minnetrista to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, to revise the city's employment forecast upward as shown in Table 1 of the attached review record, to advise the city to provide the council with a date the city adopted its final local water management plan and provide a copy of that plan if it differs from the one that was submitted to the council in March of 2019, and then to advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for transportation, land use, and water supply. So the city, with the change of meetings, is unable to attend today's meeting, but I did want to recognize the city, their community development director, David Abel, city planning staff, Eric Zwieber and Nick Olson, and say how much it was appreciated. They put a lot of hard work. We had a lot of coordination and back and forth on this plan, and it's so appreciated the time and effort and coordination that the city had in ensuring that their plan was in conformance with regional system plans. So although they can't be here, I really do want to recognize all the effort they've put in. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thanks, Ms. Dominic, and please convey the committee's thanks back to the city staff that worked on this and others. Any questions on the report? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a just very curious question and kind of goes into the weeds. But when you said we work together to adjust the employment numbers, how does that happen? Do we see their initial plan and then we go back to them and say, we think you're looking at the wrong data set, you need to do some more homework, or how do we negotiate that?
Ms. Norman.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lee, it can happen in a few different ways. In particular, with this plan, the city had proposed through the comprehensive planning cycle some adjustments to the employment forecasts that were in their 2015 system statement. And they said, given the fact that we're planning for some additional commercial development within the planning period, that we're adding some new areas, we'd like to have an increase in our employment forecast. We think that they should be higher based on this potential new future commercial development. And so the council staff and the city then coordinate and talk about what is appropriate based on different assumptions associated with that change. So this was for this particular instance, it was coordination and a proposed forecast adjustment within the plan itself that kind of triggered the discussion and change.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on this report? Further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Thurman has brought a series of recommended actions related to approving the City of Minnetrista's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Ms. Thurman, for your work. Next, we'll move on to the City of Osseo 2040 Comprehensive Plan 2019-175 JT, and that will be presented by Mr. Wycheck. Welcome.
Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you, Chair and committee members. As the Chair mentioned, my name is Eric Wycheck, and I'm a sector representative for District 2 in the Local Planning Assistance Group in Community Development. And before you today is the review of the City of Osceo's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. I would like to personally thank Mrs. Smaybeck Apps, the city planner, and the City of Osseo for all of their hard work and contributions to this plan. This map shows the location of regional system components within the City of Osseo. There are two interceptors within the boundary of the city. County State 8 Highway 81 or Botno Boulevard runs from the southeast to the northwest of the city. Regional park system components within Osseo include Crystal Lake Regional Trail. Thrive MSP 2040 has designated the city as urban. Osseo is located in the north central part of Hennepin County. It is surrounded by the communities of Brooklyn Park to the east and Maple Grove to the west. Table 1, which is also in your staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by approximately 400 people, representing 200 households. There will be an increase of 380 jobs in the city during that same time frame. Table 2 from the staff report shown here illustrates the planned residential density in the city. The overall density for guided residential land is expected to be 17.84 units per acre. Communities with an urban designation under Thrive are expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth at overall average minimum densities of 10 units per acre for new development and redevelopment. Osceo's plan is consistent with this policy. The city's existing land use map refers to Figure 3 in the staff report. The city's existing land use concentrates industrial development south of Botno Boulevard and commercial and some mixed use and higher density residential along Central Avenue, which is the main artery in the city. The city's future land use map refers to Figure 4 in the staff report. The plan identifies two mixed-use land use categories that are concentrated along Central Avenue. The former industrial area south of Botno Boulevard has been re-guided to commercial, and a school site in the northeast portion of the city has been identified for potential future residential development, most likely after 2040. I wanted to just briefly highlight OSSIO's innovative planning approach here. In working with the city, we became aware very, very early on that the city was working with Hennepin County Public Health, but also Minnesota Department of Health on using a health equity lens to do their comprehensive plan. And throughout the plan, there are these different icons that are used to identify different policies and strategies that the city has identified that would promote a healthy community. So I think that is worth highlighting here. Council staff have found that the plan conforms to Metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. This plan has appeared before the Environment Committee on Tuesday, July 9th, and it was unanimously approved. And it will be appearing at the Metropolitan Council meeting on Wednesday, July 24th. Council staff proposed the following actions: that the council authorize the city of Osseo to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecasts. I'm quite happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wycheck. Questions on that report, Councilmember Bento?
Do we know how many cities are using that innovative planning approach?
Mr. Wycheck?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I do know that there was, Hennepin County was leading a series of group workshops looking at health and planning for health. And there were a lot of cities in that cohort, and they met, I think, almost on a monthly basis. I went to quite a few of those meetings, and I also presented at some of those. So I do think that some of the policies that were coming out of those cohort meetings were incorporated into quite a lot of the plans. But I think that Osseo was a little bit unique in that I think they even obtained funding for some of these efforts because they did a lot of engagement around health from the early stages.
Councilmember Bento?
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I'm a slow learner. I'll get it. I just find this tool and leverage and opportunity just immeasurable in terms of the quality it would bring to planning. And I know that Washington County is doing something similar. I don't know if it's a planning tool, but I know they're into working with their communities on health initiatives. And to the extent that we as a council can help share those resources, I think it would be great, because it certainly is an equity issue in all sorts of ways. And certainly is also a marketing issue for communities when they're engaged in this kind of a conversation and planning. So thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thanks, Chair. And just to build on what Councilmember Vento shared, I think I want to just say thank you to staff for including this information. It just helps give a whole nother flavor to what we're doing, but I also think beyond marketing, the opportunity to share practices and bring and highlight them and make others aware of them. I don't know what other would be the platform. Not that there are cities who sit and watch this, maybe there are, I don't know, or look, but even the opportunities to then share between our communities when we're talking to them about, hey, this is what so-and-so used. This is just, so I just want to say thank you. This is kind of thing they've been looking for, especially as it relates to equity, but there may be other areas of innovation or interesting things that communities are doing. And this is just really powerful in that way for us to be able to share across. So I also had that question about were other groups doing this, so I appreciate that answer. The last thing I'm wondering is, did they share by happenstance any learnings that came from applying this or observations as a part of their plan?
Mr. Wycheck.
Committee member, Chair, interestingly enough, we are currently working with the city on producing a planning highlight that will be shared through the local planning handbook. And that planning highlight will really lay out all those lessons learned.
Great.
And we typically have a point of contact with the city so that other communities can approach them and actually ask how they went about doing this, how could they implement this practice in their own community, that sort of thing.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
Mr.
Ms.
Chair,
Ross.
council members, we'd be happy to share that highlight with you once we have that complete as well.
Well, thank you. Further discussion on this report? Seeing none, Mr. Wycheck brings recommended action before the Community Development Committee to authorize the City of Osseo to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and to advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecasts. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second?
Thank you. Discussion on the motion?
Is there anyone present from Osseo?
Mr. Wycheck, is
No, the planner was not able to make it to this meeting.
please pass our thanks for their work along. Further discussion on the motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you. Thank you for your work, Mr. Wycheck. Next, we'll move on to item 2019-198, JT, the City of Excelsior's 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan, and that will be presented by Mr. Riley. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Lilligren, members of the committee. I'm Jake Riley. I'm sector representative for the Lake Minnetonka communities of District 3. And I'd like to let the committee know that Emily Becker, the City of Excelsior's planner, had been here, but she has to get all the way back to Excelsior in the rain for a council meeting tonight. So
Thank her for being.
But she was really wonderful to work with, and unfortunately she doesn't get to hear that today, but she's great.
Thank you.
Before you today is the review of the City of Excelsior's 2040 Comprehensive Plan, and the map in front of you, shows the regional systems in Excelsior, which includes the regional sewer system. There are 2 interceptors and 2 lift stations within the boundary of the city. Trunk Highway 7 is the principal arterial that runs through Excelsior, and Three Rivers Park District is the parks implementing agency for the City of Excelsior. The property or project that they work on as a regional system component in Excelsior's Lake Minnetonka LRT Regional Trail, and there's also the Lake Independence Trail Extension Search Corridor within the city. The city is located sort of surrounded by Shorewood and Greenwood along the shores of Lake Minnetonka. Thrive MSP 2040 has designated the city as suburban, and it's surrounded by other similarly suburban communities. They're mostly fully sewered. The forecasted growth for the city, referencing Table 1 in your staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by 50 people, representing 30 households. This is an upward forecast adjustment from the one in their system statement, and there will be an increase of 200 jobs in the city in the same time frame. That forecast has not changed. Then the planned residential density, for the city in Table 2 shown here from the staff report. Overall density guided in the city is between 8 and 18 units per acre. That sort of meets or exceeds the community designation of suburban, which expects communities to plan for a minimum of 5 units per acre. Therefore, Excelsior's plan is consistent with that policy as well. I have 2 land use maps to show you from the City of Excelsior. The first is the existing land use, which is in Figure 3 of your staff report. The land use in Excelsior is predominantly residential with a commercial core and open space along the lake. And then the proposed land use is very similar, although they intend to intensify land uses with the addition of a mixed use designation in that central core. So the future land use continues to be predominantly residential with a commercial core and a new mixed-use category that sort of enhances that commercial core, which is located in the commercial district along Water Street and Trunk Highway 7. So with that, the proposed findings are that the plan conforms to the Metropolitan System plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. And the plan is expected to be heard at the Environment Committee because it is fully sewered on Tuesday, July 22nd, and it won't come back to the full council until Wednesday, August 14th. From the other things that happened today. And the proposed action is inaccurate on this slide, so I'll refer to the first page of your staff report. The forecast adjustment doesn't show up on this side, so the recommendation and the proposed action is that you authorize the City of Excelsior to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, revise the city's forecasts upward as shown in Table 1 of the attached review record, revise the city's therefore revise the city's affordable housing allocation to 12 units as described in the review record, and advise the city to implement advisory comments in the review record for surface water management and water supply.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Questions on that report? Any questions? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So they're going to grow by 50 people, but have 150 jobs. How are we going to entice 100 people to move up there?
Mr. Riley? Or was that a rhetorical question?
That's a rhetorical question.
Remember? Thank you. That is some growth. Any further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none, the proposed action is that the council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record, and then there are the 4 recommended actions for this committee as stated in the staff report. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Is there a second? Second? Is that a second? Further discussion on the motion? Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Mr. Riley, for your work. Yeah. And we'll move on to item 6 on the non-consent business agenda. It's the last of our comprehensive plans for today. It's item 2019-199. JT, it's the City of West St. Paul 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. And Mr. Boland, welcome.
Thank you, Chair, council members. My name is Patrick Boylan. I work in local planning assistance, and tonight going to speak to you about the City of West St. Paul in Councilmember Chiley's district. Map before you shows regional systems, which include 2 regional trails, search corridor, and a regional park. The city of West St. Paul is considered an urban center community, and it's surrounded by the cities of St. Paul to the north. It's the very northern part of City of St. Paul to the north, South St. Paul to the east, Emerald Grove Heights to the south, along with Sunfish Lake, and then Mendota Heights off to the west. The forecasted growth for the community is shown here. It also appears in my staff report. And just to note that the population between now and 2040, the council forecast growth of 2,300 people, which represent 900 households, and an increase of 900 jobs in the city at that same time period. Planned residential density for the community is as follows. Just as a note that, as I said before, West St. Paul is a urban center plan. Thrive MSP calls for those communities to plan for development and redevelopment to be at least 20 units per acre. It's a pretty wide range here. We expect a minimum through analysis to be just under 22 units per acre, but upwards of 39 units per acre. The existing land use, there is a lot of single family, which is the pale yellow, scattered medium and high density, and a pretty strong commercial corridor there. Highway 3 is South Robert Street, it's Robert Trail. And if you've been through West St. Paul, you know there's a lot of commercial along Robert Street heading south out of St. Paul. City's also served by US Highway 52. The future land use, not surprisingly, has a concentration of development and redevelopment along Robert Street. The purple on this map is their mixed-use area. There have been a number of projects, residential projects on or very close to Robert Street itself. Robert Street was actually rebuilt in the last couple of years. But for the 2020 to 2040 timeframe, there's a continued focus on Robert Street. So with transit amenities, other commercial amenities, and parks, it makes for, in my opinion, good planning. The findings in your staff report presented today is that the plan does conform with Metropolitan system plans. It's consistent with council policies, and it's compatible with the plans of adjacent and local government units and affected jurisdictions. The plan itself, you're hearing it tonight. The Environment Committee, there is a sewer plan that'll go before the Environment Committee on July 23rd next week, and then the full council will hear it in August 14th, so a few more weeks. Proposed action for tonight for the Community Development Committee is to authorize the city to place its 2040 plan into place, and that to advise the city to provide the council the date the city adopted the final local water management plan when available. So that'll be communications between the city and my office, and then folks who look at surface water management. So that is that's my presentation. If you have questions, I'm available this time. At this time, there is no one that I recognize from the city here right now.
Thank you, Mr. Boylan. Questions on that report? Any questions? Seeing none, Mr. Boylan brings recommended actions before us to authorize the City of West St. Paul to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and advise the city to provide the council the date the city adopted the final local water management plan when it's available. Councilmember Lee, did you want to move approval?
Yeah, so moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you for your work, Mr. Boylan. Thank you. We'll move on to item 7 in the non-consent business agenda. It's the Livable Communities Act tax-based revitalization account funding recommendations. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for putting this item on your busy agenda today. So I am going to talk about one of those grants that Heather brought up, the Livable Communities grants, in particular the tax-based revitalization account. I'll start with a brief overview, and then we'll get right to the recommendation for this cycle.
Thank you.
So the purpose of the grants are to clean up contamination, to help redevelopments either increase the tax base or add jobs or affordable housing units. The program is also expected to look at funding partners and provide the best public benefits for the costs incurred. We receive our guidance from a couple of different sources. We get it from statute that kind of looks at the kind of high level aspects, eligibility, total funding amount, source of funding, that sort of thing. We also look to Thrive 2040 to how grants incrementally meet the Thrive outcomes. And then lastly, we, as Heather already mentioned, we look at an annual fund distribution plan to how we should award those grants each year. We offered 3 different categories of grants: seeding equitable environmental development grants, SEED for short, so I'll keep using that. Those are for grants that do not have a project in mind. They are for projects in areas or near areas of concentrated poverty, and they include either investigation, a partial cleanup, or some combination thereof. The other category we offer is environmental investigation grants. Those are for sites that have a perceived contamination, or they know that they have it, but they don't know how much it's going to cost. Those are grants to help you find out that sort of thing. Lastly, we have cleanup grants. Those are for sites that already have a development, they have their cleanup plan completed, and they're looking to implement that cleanup before construction. So let's take a look quickly at what requests we received this funding cycle. We received 19 applications requesting $7.3 million from the council. The locations, the cities are shown in blue of where those projects are located. We did have one applicant withdraw during the evaluation phase. That was from Falcon Heights. We are offering almost $3.5 million in funding. And so in this case, I want to point out that the fact that the account is oversubscribed is an important factor for what we'll see in the funding limits in a few slides. The next 3 tables, we're going to look at the staff recommendation for the individual grant categories. To save time, I'm just going to read the grant projects. So Staff is recommending funding for 2 seed grants. Those are for 1433 University and Powerhouse at HAMS Phase 1, ARMS Phase 2. Staff is also recommending 1 award for environmental investigation. This is for the 605-617 Stryker Avenue project. And lastly, we're recommending funding for 11 cleanup projects: Leaf South, Calhoun Towers Building C, 907 Winter Street, Checkerboard, Malcolm Yards Market, 201 to 211 4th Street, 441 to 453 Snelling Avenue, Arbor Lakes Corporate Center, 3120 Excelsior, Riverwalk Village, and the Panache Cidery. So getting back to those limits, when the funding amount is oversubscribed, as it is in this cycle, a maximum of 75% of the amount recommended for award can go to the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and only 50% can go to a single city. So let's go at that a little bit more detail. So the staff recommendation in this case, we are only recommending 44% of the total award for the city of Minneapolis. That's 40% of the recommended amount, 49% of the total we made available to the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. So that's below the 75% maximum. We are also recommending 36% of the total available to the city of Minneapolis. That is below the 50% maximum. We did not recommend funding for 4 projects: Founders Ridge Phase 2, Big Ice Company Tap Room, Sears Warehouse, and Icinger Meadows. Each of these projects scored below our required minimum to be recommended by staff for funding. That minimum is 75 points out of 150 points. If the staff...
I'm sorry to interrupt. Question from Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you. I was wondering if before the full council hears this, we can just get a little background on what things those other ones that were turned down need to work on in order to be eligible in the future. You know, things that were obvious shortfalls that they could
Mr. Martin.
work on.
Mr. Chair, Council Member, is this something you would like to do now, or would you want to do it?
We're in a hurry here today, I'm thinking. Okay. So if you want to just send me an email or something later, that would be fine.
Very good. Understood.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. A question from Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I think that'd be good to send to all of us.
The committee.
So I'd like to see that too. I also am wondering, is there a rubric you can share for that scoring mechanism, for the 100-point scoring mechanism, and who's involved in that rubric?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Council Member, I will share that. It will be the same as the one that Paul Burns presented to you about 2 months ago, I think.
Great.
Thank you. Councilmember?
One other piece and I apologize because 2 months ago was a world away. You all laugh because you know it's true. So if you could also share how we're defining equity as it relates to the seating, equitable environmental development. I'm assuming that's in the rubric for, I'm going to guess there's a rubric that's individual for each of those 3 categories. And that is clear or explicit in the rubric for the seed 1.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, what I'll say about that one is based on the geography. So it's based on where we target our funds in areas of concentrated poverty. We do take into account other equity measures in all of the grant categories, but that particular program is the distinction is based on geography and the readiness of the project.
Okay. Further questions, Councilmember comments?
Thank you, Chair. So when you're not able to fully fund a request, and maybe you covered this and I didn't hear, but how do you decide then to adjust? Do you take a straight percentage off of each of the ones in Minneapolis, St. Paul, or according to, how do you decide to make adjustments, I guess?
Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, what we look at is we look at fully funding the request to the degree that it is eligible under our under our policies for livable communities. So we are only offer partial awards in the case of the remaining funding. So usually that last award may be a partial award, but all the other ones we try to fully fund the request.
Okay,
Councilmember?
I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Further questions at this point? Seeing none, Mr. Martin, please continue.
So if the staff recommendation were approved, gains would be expected in the net tax capacity, the creation of over 1,000 jobs, a significant number of housing units, including affordable units, and large amounts of commercial space.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Johnson.
So I think that's interesting that in this program we can calculate or estimate to the best extent possible, right, that additional tax capacity that we'll get back. But when I asked that about, it may have been about fiscal disparities. We aren't able to, I'm just curious how, I was given an answer where it's harder to calculate that. So I'm just curious, not for tonight, but I appreciate this kind of information because it's an investment piece, right? So.
Mr.
Director
Chair,
Brockes.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, could you remind me of your question about fiscal disparities again, too?
I will. I'll do it after tonight. But it was just like, I like to know when money is being put places, you know, what to the best extent possible we can estimate as an ROI. So I appreciate that very much in this plan.
Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on this. Because this program is funded from fiscal disparities, it's designed to increase the tax base, and that's part of the way that you get points, because you're bringing land back into the tax rolls by cleaning it up.
Mr. Chair, briefly, that might have been my question originally then. So I'm happy to see this estimate in here, but maybe there was another slice of it that I don't know, but I like this kind of stuff, so thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Martin.
The recommendation, the staff recommendation to this committee is that the Metropolitan Council award 14 tax-based revitalization account grants totaling $3,500,500 to assist redevelopment projects in the cities of Hastings, Maple Grove, Minneapolis, Ramsey, and St. Paul. And number two, authorize its Community Development Division Director to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the council.
Thank you, Mr. Martin, for that recommendation. Any further questions on this report? Further questions? Seeing none, Mr. Martin has proposed the action that we award the 14 tax-based revitalization account grants as shown in Table 1 and authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreements. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Mr. Martin, for your
Thank you for
work
your
on
time.
this. Thank you so much. Thanks, Mr. We're moving on to item 8 under the non-consent business items 2019-166. JT, it's the 2019 budget amendment, second quarter, and I believe Nick Hendrickson will be presenting on this. Mr. Hendrickson, welcome.
Yes, Mr. Chair, committee members, good afternoon. My name is Nick Hendrickson. I'm the budget manager for MTS and Community Development Divisions. In the item before you today, we propose to remove just under $1 million in completed projects and bring in new funds to pass through to the regional parks implementing agencies. New funds include $19.8 million of Parks and Trails legacy funds appropriated in this legislative session and $1.3 million in regional bonds. Legacy funds for Metropolitan Regional Park System are distributed to the agencies according to a formula set in Minnesota statute. By law, 10% of each year's appropriation is set aside for land acquisition. The remaining 90% is distributed by a formula that can be found in your business item. Data elements required to complete the legacy allocation formula were finalized less than a week ago on July 9th, 2019. This amendment contains the final allocation amounts by agency, represented by the projects titled Unallocated Funds. Bringing state fiscal year 20 legacy formula dollars into our capital budget now as unallocated projects demonstrates our commitment to supporting regional partners and meeting their frequent request to pass funding through as quickly as we are able. All state and council required reviews and controls are maintained. Council staff are actively working with parks agencies to finalize which projects will be funded with state fiscal year 20 legacy dollars. A master list of projects will be funded with state fiscal year 2020 and 2021 legacy dollars was developed following statute and council policy. These projects have been reviewed and recommended by the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission and approved by the council on October 24th, 2018 through business item 2018-261. You will see the final project selection in the administrative amendments section in a future budget amendment. 100% of funding included in this budget amendment will be passed through to the 10 regional parks implementing agencies. This amendment supports the Thrive outcome of stewardship through responsible planning, management of resources for the Community Development Division, and the regional park system. It also addresses livability and providing access to natural resources for healthy exercise. Our proposed action is that you authorize the 2019 unified budget as indicated in accordance with the attached tables. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hendrickson. Questions on that report?
Thank you,
Councilmember
Mr.
Wolf.
Chair.
Yeah.
Under the closing project section, it says that the remaining bond balance for some of the grants that didn't use their full allocation will be relinquished back to the council. But it's my understanding that those bonds are by formula to each agency. So why is the agency not getting that money back to put towards another project?
Mr. Hendrickson.
Mr. Chair, these projects are complete and they are being closed based on the fund distribution policy plan.
Councilmember Wolf.
Mr. Chair, but some of these say that there's still money left and that the remaining balance is going to the council. There's never been, well, right now the policy plan doesn't have the fiscal portions in it because we approved the policy plan without those in. So we're in limbo and now we're doing something different. Where's that money going to go?
Mr. Hendrickson.
Mr. Chair, I really don't have that level of detail with me. I can follow with my staff and let you know.
Mr. Chair, I would move that we table this item until we have that information because that's too important to just wait for later.
Okay, we have Mr. Mullen approaching the...
I'll second for discussion purposes.
Okay, so the motion to table, is that what we have before us now?
That's a non-debatable motion. Never mind. I'll withdraw my second.
Okay. Let's hear from Mr. Mullen before we...
Robert's rules weirdo over here.
Mr. Chair, committee members, if what it is we're talking about is legacy funds, then the funding does stay with the individual park agencies. That's clear. And
that's not what it says here, Mr. Chair. Either with the legacy funds or with the council bonds that are distributed by formula to the agencies, when they get a project done under budget, they're supposed to get the money back to put into another project. It does not go to some just general council fund, and that's not what it says here in this. And I won't vote to approve this until we know where that money is going.
Director Barajas.
Mr. Chair, council members, it doesn't go back to a general council pot, like the way interest earnings is in a separate pot. It goes back typically either to what is, if you look into your on your staff report following, I was thinking about my own budget book. Budget book has unallocated balances for each of our implemented agencies that usually represent dollars that they've had savings over time. So those go back into their pots. And oftentimes, implementing agencies then will amend existing projects to add additional dollars to them when they find that those dollars, or when they find that the projects are added to that. And those always come back to you for changes.
Mr. Chair, there are some of those in this report that they're reallocating to another project. That's the section before the closed areas. But in the closed areas, they specifically say the remaining council bond balance is relinquished back to the council. So again, I reiterate my motion to table this.
Second.
And
We don't have time to play around with this all night with a long
Okay,
agenda
so
anyway.
we have a motion to table. It's been seconded. That's a non-debatable motion. Do we?
Could I move to amend?
No, it's yeah, it's
Oh, that's right.
non-debatable.
Never mind.
Let's see, there's thumbs with that.
Excuse me, no, you can't amend it. You either
Right,
table it or do
right.
not table it. Continue discussion.
So I will call for the vote on the motion to table. All in approval.
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Just, is there a date certain on this?
Next meeting.
Point
I
of
mean, I'm assuming they
information.
can
So would you make that
they
For
can
the
answer
next
this.
meeting, point of information, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen. This is a non-debatable motion. Do you have a question?
I have a question.
Yeah, point of yeah.
Okay. And forgive me because in my role as liaison at MPOSC, I'm new and still coming back from vacation. And so I wasn't as thorough in reviewing this particular item, and it wasn't one that came before MPOSC at our last meeting. And so I would also just add to that, for many of us being new, this is really detailed and very deep to just have a presentation or to not receive a presentation that's informative as well. So I want to say thank you to Councilmember Wolf for your institutional knowledge on this, but ask that. So my question is just, or maybe it's more discussion than question, so I apologize if I'm wrong. I just would like that to be thought of in the context of things like this going forward, just remembering that many of our council members are new in their roles and will be seeing some of these things for the first time. And this is a lot to see without any informational presentation or visual information shared or an opportunity really to do that. This isn't a great tool for having a conversation. The business item report document is not, and this is, I think, still very much a learning time for us. If I could just add that in, that's all.
Okay. Do you have a question, Councilmember Bento? Okay. Point of information, Councilmember Bento.
I have a question of the maker of the motion, Mr. Chair. Are you referring to the whole business item or just the portion, the section that is closing projects?
I was talking about the entire business item, and if it comes back in 2 weeks, that would give them time to figure out what they're doing and give a better explanation to the entire committee on how this is working.
So the committee's expectation is that we would table this for one cycle and take it up again at the next Community Development Committee meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the motion to table is before us. All in approval, please say aye.
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 Opposed? We'll see this again next cycle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hendrickson. Move on to the item 9 under non-consent business. It's 2019-156, a park acquisition opportunity fund grant for Big Marine Park Reserve in Washington County. And Ms. Lee, is that? No. Will staff presenting?
Yes.
Ms. Lee, there you are. Hello. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Mullen.
I'm back.
Yes,
Mr.
welcome.
Chair, committee members, these business items are contingent on the passage of that last item. And so I'm wondering,
They need to go next.
The next 5 items. Sorry, 4 items will need to be tabled.
yeah, all the acquisition ones.
So I will use the awesome authority of the chair to move those onto our next agenda. Is that correct, Ms. Barajas? Or
Mr. Chair, council members, that is certainly the effect that that would have. I know that our staff are wanting to be sure this does not impede our implementing agencies moving through with these acquisitions, knowing that they have timing issues associated with them as well.
So my understanding is the final 4 items are contingent on 2019-16 passage of that. So since we haven't passed that, we can't move forward.
Mr. Chair, council members, that is correct.
Councilmember Wolf.
My question, I guess, would be, are there any that need to close in the next 2 weeks
Mr.
that would be impeded? And can we take up the budget item for just that thing in order to let those progress.
Mr. Mullen, Ms. Lee, any of the items that need, any of these acquisitions that had scheduled closing before our next cycle?
Mr. Chair, committee members, I currently don't know of timing concerns, but that isn't because I don't know what the answer is to that. So there could potentially be timing considerations. I know that the agencies have been waiting since for the new money to become available. So I feel underinformed.
Ms. Barras, you look like you were about to say something.
I missed that. I'm sorry.
Are you pondering something?
Mr. Chair.
I was just, sorry,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I
Yeah.
was just thinking if there was any additional information that I might have seen in my review of items, but I can't recall.
The motion and get.
Councilmember Johnson?
You want me to do that?
Sure.
Mr. Chair, I will move to reconsider the motion where we tabled the item and bring it back for consideration.
Certainly, or we could move to consider the item as well. That's always fair once we've made something.
Okay.
So you could move to consider item 2019. Wait, which one was it? Yeah, 2019-166 JT. So move to consider.
Or reconsider to just bring it back up.
Yep,
Then
yeah.
I think our intentions are. We'll split
Yeah,
it.
I mean, if we can bring it back up, I would be willing to vote for the portion of this budget amendment that includes the acquisition funds, because the remaining budget items are all acquisitions, right? So
Mr. Chair, Councilmember.
just approve the part that's for acquisition money, leave the rest of it
Okay.
so they can explain it.
Let's figure out, Mr. Mullen, did you want to contribute?
Okay, so a second on her reconsideration.
Okay.
Excuse me,
No, it's back.
point of order, one. Okay, so we have a motion to bring this item back to this agenda right now.
Yes.
And it's a second,
Mhm.
correct?
Okay.
Good.
You can do it
Not a
whichever
motion
way you
till I
want to
say
call
it.
it, but yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
and
Mullen,
committee
point of
members,
information.
could we also bring back the FY 2021 Parks and Trails legacy grants that are included in that budget amendment, but that aren't associated with the portion of the grants that Councilmember Wolf expressed concern over?
So the motion that would be before us would be to bring the full item back for consideration. And my guess is Councilmember Wolf would move to postpone part of.
If we bring the full item back, I'm going to move again to take out part of it, but this whole budget thing has been really weird. It's been handled differently than we've done it in the past. I'm confident that we have sufficient accounting for the acquisition, because those have been churning through and just waiting on this for months. I do not have the confidence in the rest of the budget process, because things have not been operating in the normal manner. We haven't been getting answers in a timely fashion, and I want to fully understand it before I make a budget amendment. This is a lot of money.
So the motion has been made and seconded to reconsider item 2019-166 JT. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
So on that motion, let's vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. So that item is before us. Councilmember Wolf, I'm going to turn to you.
I would like to move the portion of the budget amendment that is for acquisition funding only.
Is that clear? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. So now discussion on that motion. Mr. Mullen, is it clear to you what we're voting on?
Mr. Chair, yes. Thank you for the consideration and for making this adjustment.
And discussion on the motion.
And Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Johnson.
briefly, I want to thank Councilmember Wolf because she's come to the management committee meeting. That was the item I think you were
Right.
discussing there
Yep.
too. And again, with her experience and certainly with staff's experience, I appreciate this tonight. It makes sense to me, and I'd like to learn more to your point. Also, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, so I fully support this.
So it's clear to Mr. Mullen, it's clear to Director Barajas what we're voting on. Is it clear to council members, committee members? Okay. So on the Councilmember Wolf's motion to approve the acquisition portions of this proposed action, correct?
Yes.
Discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. So now we can move
Now we
on
can do the rest of the
through
agenda.
the rest of the agenda. Thank you. That was an interesting procedural
It's
detour.
okay.
We will move on then to item 2019-156, Park Acquisition Opportunity Grant Fund for Big Marine Park Reserve in Washington County. Ms. Lee.
Thank you so much, Chair and members. My name is Jessica Lee for the record. I am a Senior Grants Administrator for Parks. And thank you so much for accommodating these business items that are very time sensitive for our agencies.
Thank you.
I am here tonight to talk about the Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund grant for Big Marine Park Reserve, the Nelson property. This is in Washington County and is business item 2019-156, which was approved by the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission on July 9th. Big Marine Park Reserve is located in northern Washington County. On the screen in front of you, and the middle map shows shaded in purple the park boundary for Big Marine Park Reserve. And the property in the subject property is highlighted in red. It's a total of 4 parcels for 75.4 acres. And to the right is another map that shows those 4 separate parcels highlighted. This map zooms in on the one parcel that does have property developments on it. This house, barn, and storage shed will have to be removed or demolished. The other 3 parcels have no improvements. I included these pictures, which were taken as part of the appraisal, because they highlight the natural resources benefit of this property, including 10 acres of wetlands. Our rationale for recommendation is this acquisition is consistent with the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, State Fiscal Year 2020 Parks and Trails Legacy Fund appropriation requirements, the Big Marine Park Reserve Master Plan, and Washington County is within its $1.7 million per year limit for Parks and Trails Legacy PAOF funding. This slide shows the property cost for the Nelson property. The purchase price is $1,050,000, and they're offering 100% of the appraised value. The total project cost is $1,084,064.29. This slide breaks it out into the grant funding portion. The local match is 25% at $271,000. The grant amount is $813,048.22. And of that, we have a 40-60 split. So 60% is the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund, and the council match is $325,000. So our recommendation today is to approve a grant of up to $813,048.22 to Washington County to acquire the 75.4-acre Nelson property located at 12096 170th Street in the City of Marine-on-St. Croix for Big Marine Park Reserve, contingent on council approval of the 2019 Quarter 2 Unified Budget Amendment, business item 2019-166JT, and authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreement and restrictive covenant on behalf of the council.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Any questions on that report? Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Previously, when properties have been acquired for this part, since it's like half in holdings at this point, we've had maps that show who, which parts are owned by the park agency and which parts are owned by other entities. I would like to have that map back again before the council votes on this, just so that we understand where it fits into what's already owned. But that won't hold me up on voting for it today.
Thank you, Councilmember. And Ms. Lee, you heard that request. Thank you. If you could provide that to the full committee. Any other questions on the report?
Mr. Chair.
Yep. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are there any relocation benefits that we have to participate in, or is the homestead already owned in?
Chair and members,
Ms.
no,
Lee.
there are not.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions on the report? Further questions?
Discussion.
Yeah. Did you want? Yeah.
I can. I just want to share with the
Councilmember
group
Appleton.
that, thank you, Chair, that the Metropolitan Parks Open Space Commission voted unanimously to support this proposal, and also that it was acknowledged that I think this is part of maybe that question is a significant portion of what is needed to make up this reserve. And so there's a lot of excitement around that.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? Ms. Lee brought forward a proposed action to approve the grant of up to $813,048.22 to Washington County to acquire these properties and authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreement. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, that carries. Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Lee. We'll move on to item 2019-157, Park Acquisition Opportunity Grant Fund for the River to River Greenway, Dakota County. Mr. Kelly, thanks for being here.
Mr. Chair, council members, I'm Colin Kelly, Regional Parks Planning Analyst, and I'm here today to present a Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund, PAOF grant request for the River to River Regional Trail in Dakota County. Just for a little context here, within the regional park system, we're looking at the northern tip of Dakota County. We were in West St. Paul earlier today, and we'll return there for a short while this afternoon as well. The regional trail corridor has both planned and existing segments. This grant request focuses specifically on a parcel that's needed to connect the regional trail through a fairly urban area of West St. Paul. As mentioned, here we are, the northern tip of Dakota County. The 8-mile, mostly east-west trail corridor connects the Mississippi River in Lilydale to the Mississippi River at South St. Paul. Much of the paved trail along the corridor exists today, with some exceptions, but there are trailheads at the Big Rivers Regional Trailhead in Lilydale and in Kaposha Park in South St. Paul. The regional trail's context is both urban and suburban development, consisting of residential and commercial areas, as well as some interspersed parkland in Mendota Heights, West St. Paul, and South St. Paul. Zooming in a little bit here, this is the map from our River to River Greenway master plan, which depicts the preferred regional trail routing from Lilydale to South St. Paul. An excerpt of this map appears as Figure 3 in your staff report. Might be a little bit hard to see here, but there's a red dot within that blue circle on the map, and that is the proposed grade-separated crossing that this grant request would help achieve. The subject parcel is located at 1539 Robert Street South in West St. Paul and is bounded on the east by Robert Street and on the west by Livingston Avenue. The grant request is for a regional trail easement on the former Blockbuster property, originally acquired for commercial development purposes by the city of West St. Paul. The 70-foot wide corridor, totaling 0.55 acres, will allow for construction of an already planned and funded tunnel beneath Robert Street. Fortunately, for those looking to access the existing and planned regional trail corridor, there are many connections to Metro Transit in place, including routes 417, 75, 452, and 71. There's also a park and ride lot at the West St. Paul Sports Complex at the intersection of Oakdale Avenue and Wentworth Avenue East, which is basically right across the street from the trail. The rationale for recommendation is based on multiple items that are summarized here and appear on page 3 of the staff report. That is, the grant request is consistent with an existing 2017 council-approved master plan. The request for future reimbursement consideration is authorized by the regional fund distribution policy. The property is eligible for funding through the 10% of our 2020 Parks and Trails Legacy Fund appropriation set aside by statute for land acquisition. And Dakota County is well within its $1.7 million per year limit for PAOF funding. The funding and grant structure are as follows. Of the $570,130 total project cost, $256,558.50 would be provided by the fiscal year 2020 Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, and $171,039 would be provided by council match. That's a total grant amount of $427,597.50. Dakota County will provide $142,532.50. That said, the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council approve a grant of up to $427,597.50 to Dakota County to acquire the 0.55 acre easement across the Blockbuster property, authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreement and restrictive covenant, consider reimbursing Dakota County for up to $142,532.50, inform Dakota County that if the county fails to complete the needed land assemblage by December 31st, 2022, then the county agrees to reimburse the council for the cost of this property, and the future reimbursement consideration for this acquisition is nullified. And inform Dakota County that the council does not, under any circumstances, represent or guarantee that the council will grant future reimbursement. I should note that the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission voted unanimously to recommend the proposed action at its meeting on July 9th. And with that, I will stand for any comments or questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Any questions on that report, Councilmember Atlas and Marina Britson?
I'll just share a little bit from MCOS's feedback about this action. This was a great example of a wonderful intersection of the nexus of all the aspects of the Thrive lens that came out during our conversation. So it had unanimous support. This is a place that is also going to see a new Hy-Vee. It's creating access and increasing safety for a very diverse and underserved part of the community. So this was, and also some really amazing stormwater improvements that I know Councilmember Lindstrom would be really excited about. In fact, I think he was there. Did I believe? Anyway, if he wasn't, he was there in spirit, rooting in the background. So this was just an example of all the intersections that can come up, and there was tons of excitement. We were able to have someone there from the implementing agency to answer and talk to some of those best practices, but it was an area of quite a bit of excitement for a number of the commissioners on MPOSC. So.
Thank you. Further questions or discussion? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is under my area, and one of the first electeds that contacted me to talk about business was the city administrator for West St. Paul, and they're very excited and hopeful for this project. So I'm really happy for them, and yeah, that's my comment.
Thank you.
Great.
And any further questions? Seeing none, Councilmember Lee, did you want to move the series of proposed actions on this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion? Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you. And Mr. Kelly, you're up for the next one as well. 2019-168 Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund Grant for Crowhassan Park Reserve, Three Rivers Park District. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now I'll be presenting, as you mentioned, on the Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund grant request for Crowhassan Park Reserve, which is operated by Three Rivers Park District. In the context of the regional park system.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're still fine.
We're fine.
We're fine. Thank you, Councilmember. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Please.
Yeah, no problem. Crowhassan Park Reserve is in the northwest, as you can see on this map here, and it is within the Three Rivers Park District, as I mentioned. The park reserve is within the city of Rogers and is adjacent to the Crow River, which largely delineates the border between Hennepin and Wright counties. The map on the left is an excerpt of the Three Rivers Park District system map, focusing on the northwest portion of the park system. Crowhassan is highlighted by the blue circle. The park reserve is currently connected to Baker Park Reserve by the almost 16-mile Lake Independence Regional Trail. In the future, the park reserve will also be connected to Elm Creek and Lake Rebecca Park Reserves via the Rush Creek and Crow River Regional Trails, respectively. The map on the right is the subject property within the context of Crowhassan Park Reserve and coincides with Figure 1 in your staff report. As mentioned, the subject property or parcel is located in the city of Rogers. It is 1.02 acres in size and is located in the northeast portion of Crowhassan Park Reserve and is one of the last remaining inholdings in the park reserve. The property is bounded on the south by Sylvan Lake Road and the planned Crow River Regional Trail. The property is also surrounded by the park reserve on 3 sides and has comparable natural resource value, including a partial winter view of North Twin Lake. The subject parcel consists of a house built in 1963 with a 2-stall tuck-under garage and has operated as a hobby farm for several decades. Wood and wire fencing are prevalent throughout the property. Upon acquisition, the property will be restored to mirror the adjacent resources of the park reserve, which are a combination of prairie and woods. Similar to the last item, the rationale for recommendation is based on multiple items that are summarized here and appear on pages 2 and 3 of the staff report. That is, the grant request is consistent with an existing 2040 council-approved master plan. The request for future reimbursement consideration is authorized by the regional fund distribution policy. The property is eligible for funding through the 10% of our 2020 Parks and Trails Legacy Fund appropriation set aside by state statute for land acquisition. Three Rivers is well within its $1.7 million per year limit for PTLF, PAOF funding, and the property will provide a connection to the planned Crow River Regional Trail, which has a 2017 council-approved master plan. The funding and grant structure are as follows. Of the $340,355 total project cost, $153,159.75 will be provided by the fiscal year 2020 Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, and $102,106.50 would be provided by a council match. That's a total grant amount of $255,266.25, and Three Rivers Park District will provide $85,088.75. So the proposed action before you and the council is approve a grant of up to $255,266.25 to the Three Rivers Park District to acquire the 1.02 acre Guzik parcel. Authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreement and restrictive covenant. Consider reimbursing Three Rivers Park District for up to $85,088.75. And inform Three Rivers Park District that the council does not, under any circumstances, represent or guarantee that the council will grant future reimbursement. I should note that the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission voted unanimously to recommend the proposed action at its July 9th meeting. And with that, I will stand for any questions or comments you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Any questions or comments? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious, looking at the picture of the house that's on this property, generally the ones we have seen have been, if you blew hard, it would probably fall over. And this one looks to be in fairly good shape. Is the only alternative to demolish it?
Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Chair and council member, interestingly enough, the same question came up at the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission meeting. There was an interest in potentially, if it was considered for this structure to be saved, and the response by Three Rivers Park District staff was that they did explore the option of saving the house potentially as they explore the options of saving all properties that exist on land that they may be purchasing. It's my understanding that there's concerns around asbestos in this house, and that it will require significant upgrades in accessibility to be reused for purposes that would welcome the public into those spaces. So, long story short, they looked into it. Doesn't sound like it's going to work out for this spot.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Further comments or questions on this report? Seeing none, Mr. Kelly has brought a series of proposed actions to approve the grant, to authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant, to consider reimbursing Three Rivers Park District, and also inform Three Rivers Park District that we do not represent a guarantee of reimbursement. Is there a motion to approve?
Moved.
Thank you, Councilmember. This is in your district, correct?
Yes, it is.
Thank
Second.
you, Councilmember Johnson. And a second. Any discussion on that motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
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 Opposed? That carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kelly. We'll move on to our final agenda item for today, 2019-169 Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund Grant for 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail in the Three Rivers Park District. Ms. Kinney, welcome.
Mr. Chair, committee members. Hi, my name is Tracy Kinney. I'm the planner in Regional Parks, and today before you is the Parks Acquisition Opportunity Fund Grant for 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail on behalf of Three Rivers Park District. The regional trail is located essentially in our regional park system. On the left-hand side, you'll see that the regional trail is located in the southeast corner of the Three Rivers Park District system plan, and in the right-hand image, the regional trail spans from east to west, connecting Richfield to Hopkins. The image highlights the subject property located in the Edina West segment of the 2013 Council-approved master plan. The subject property is home to New City Covenant Church. The acquisition that is under consideration today with this POAOF is a 26,636 square foot easement that is shown in yellow. And this easement was acquired via eminent domain. This was a quick take process, and Three Rivers entered into this process as a last resort to complete requirements and meet a deadline for federal transportation funding for this trail. The easement faces Tracy Avenue to the east and backs up to 9 Mile Creek to the south. Approximately 15% of the easement is within the floodplain floodway of the 9 Mile Creek. Staff finds that this item is consistent with the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan. It's within a 2013 master plan. It's consistent with the Regional Parks Fund distribution policy for future reimbursement consideration. It is consistent with the 2019 Parks and Trails Legacy Fund appropriation. It is within its Three Rivers is within its $1.7 million year limit, and that this acquisition provides a vital link for the regional trail. Here's the funding and grant structure for this acquisition. The grant amount is for $509,869.50, with the agency match of $169,956.50. The total project cost is $679,826. The proposed action before you today is to approve the grant of up to $509,869.50 to Three Rivers Park District to acquire this 26,636 square foot easement from the New City Covenant Church located at 6400 Tracy Avenue in the city of Edina for 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail, contingent on council approval of the 2019 Q2 Unified Budget Amendment of the business item 2019-166JT, and authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreement. Consider reimbursing Three Rivers Park District of up to $169,956.50, and then to inform Three Rivers Park District that the council does not, under any circumstance, represent or guarantee that the council will grant future reimbursement. And I wanted to note that at the July 9th MPOS meeting, this item was approved. There was 5 in favor, 1 in opposition, and 1 abstaining. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Discussion on this. First of all, Councilmember, Councilmember Cummings, then Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, Councilmember Lee. Councilmember Cummings.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Can you go into a little bit more about the purchase price, the $612,000 condemnation, $218,000 of appraised value? Can you explain that a little bit further?
Ms. Kinney.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I'll do my best. The purchase price is subject to condemnation, and that condemnation is a result of a lawsuit where it was 218.75% of the appraised value. Typically, it's that is over and beyond of what we would pay, but this is subject to a condemnation. In addition to that, there's due diligence of $22,000, of which all those items there are typically included in with due diligence. The holding and closing costs are $45,326, and that's also typical of a condemnation.
We also have Three Rivers Park District staff here, Mr. Flaming.
Chair, Commissioners, I'm Jonathan Flaming, Associate Superintendent of Planning, Design, and Technology. And I was asked to attend in case there were some more detailed questions. With regards to the negotiated purchase price, our initial appraisal came in at $280,000. Once it went into the condemnation process, they They did have a lawyer who advised them to do so, and they came back with an appraisal of about 900,000. And when you look at the risk assessment associated with carrying it through the entire condemnation process, we determined the best case scenario was to settle at approximately 600,000, including their lawyer fees and restitution for each of them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Yeah, I just want to clarify for those who did on the commission vote against and then abstain, it was because they were flat out against eminent domain practice use in any context.
Thank you. That's helpful. Further discussion, Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is really a dumb question, but are we taking over just the yellow strip, and are we gonna demolish the church?
Ms. Kinney.
Mr. Chair, committee members, council members, the easement is only for the yellow section right there, and it was also in addition to the magenta section, but that was a temporary easement.
Okay.
So that the church will remain. All the remainder of the parcel remains.
Okay.
So we are not condemning a church. We are just taking a small easement, relatively small. Further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Kinney brings forward a series of actions related to this grant approval. Is there a motion for approval?
I'll move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Blaming, thanks for being here with additional information. Much appreciated. All in approval of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? That carries. Thank you very much. Thanks. And seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.